Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here for the second year in a row. Um, I can't say enough about the importance of protocol and public affairs. I am not a protocol officer. My skill set is strictly in journalism and public affairs. However, my best assignments have been both overseas in the international environment and also when I had a close-knit relationship with protocol officers. Protocol officers actually they're in the know. So your organization, if anything is happening, if people are coming, if there's a vision or mission or a change, protocol officers almost always have the pulse of the organization. So as a public affairs person, now the difference is I write stories, I take photographs, I help to convey the message using different tools, video, television. I'm able to take the vision, mission, and goals of the leadership and convey that and amplify it. But using protocol as a conduit for sharing that message because they know what the commander's intent is, I'm able to speak and amplify his vision that much further. Now, I did have some slides. So because I've been doing this for 30 years, there are some, can you go to the next slide? Now, thank you. So one thing, this is, everything is a message. So I had a really long discussion yesterday. I was talking about, if you go back one for me, the picture on the front, the Buddha was in my yard. The flower just happened to be next to the Buddha and I took the picture. Now I have served in Asia. I've done 2 tours in Asia. This picture sends a message. Now, one of the reasons I actually took it off of the slides for today, because I don't know who's online. And because I don't know who's online, you don't know. So in the military, the yellow flower, usually as our commanders are doing a transition and we have a new commander coming in and a commander who's departing, yellow flowers is what we would give the incoming, and that would represent friendship and new beginnings. However, we would give red roses, for example, and most of you know this because you're protocol officers, to someone who is departing. So I actually removed this photo, but it gives me a good talking point because we all know that everything is a message. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I wanted to share some of the basic lessons that I always return to. So one, it's not just protocol and public affairs. Your operations team in a military organization, you're always going to rely on that person who's actually keeping the calendar. You would have a long-term calendar and you'd have a short-range calendar. That person, coupled with protocol and public affairs, that kind of coordination is a must. Because as you're trying to convey and amplify the messages, you have to know what's going on and you have to know in enough time to respond. So for example, when I was stationed in Europe, if I knew that I had a British entourage coming and they were coming for training, I wanted to be able to develop, when they come through my building, they would see their soldiers doing training, doing missions on the television screen. When they sit down at the table to actually host their meeting, I might provide them something that looks like a table mat, but it would have all of the key messages, the points of the conversation that we want to foot stomp, so that they have something that they can take with them, that they can walk around with, something that they can hold that conveys exactly what the commander intends. for them to know. Another thing, not all communication is words. Words is probably only about 2% of the communication experience. So we have to make sure that you look right, your actions match what you're saying. You don't want to talk about, and this is a TV thing, you don't want to talk about death and destruction and be smiling, because everything is a message. And even when you're not talking or not doing something, that also sends a message. So when you also think about public affairs and protocol and why public affairs and protocol interaction and coordination matters, you want to develop packages. You don't know what your leadership needs or what your audience needs unless you actually talk about the engagement, the itinerary, who's sitting in the vehicle with you. When you get from one destination to another, are you wasting that time when you could actually be talking and conveying and sharing and understanding what the challenges are? You always want to plan. Things happen, so you plan for the unexpected, but you also have to think about and convey the human aspect of it. Everybody wants to feel loved and thought about. There's certain basic human emotions that matter. You want to give your audience, your visitor, your diplomat an opportunity to have that bathroom break. And you don't want to embarrass him by making him have to ask for it. So as you start to plan your itineraries, those are the things that you have to think about. And as a public affairs person working with a protocol officer, I would know in advance where I can take photos, where I can't take photos. So think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know we've talked about it a little bit earlier in the conversation. Once I had three, they were CEOs that visited one of our installations. They were coming to host a meeting to talk about creating jobs for persons who were visually impaired. Well, when they arrived, all three CEOs were visually impaired. In fact, they were blind. So everything that we had to do, which were normal things that we did for visitors, they had to get out of the car. It was a icy day. We needed to know that so that we could make sure that we cleared their way to get in without having to slip on ice. When they were actually in the conference room, we had to think about things like, where their coffee cups are placed and how do we explain and express, where they can access their needs. But if you're not accustomed to doing it, it might be a difficulty for you. Now, also working with leadership. Once upon a time, I had a leader who was ADHD. He had an attention deficit disorder. He would not read slides. He would not read white papers. He wouldn't read anything. So I had to find an alternate way of conveying the information. So generally, he would listen to me on the radio once a week. I would pull together all of the talking points. He would listen, and then he would take what he heard from the radio, and then he would convey it back to our staff. And that was generally how we were able to talk internally within the organization. Another thing, as we get older, as we age, as we start to think about our audiences and refine the ways that we develop products, when you start to think tradition and all of those things, we have to remember that technology changes things. So we can always learn something new. We have to not be afraid to try something different. And if it doesn't work, we have to be able to go back and be willing to shift our thoughts, change our actions, and keep plugging away until we get the right, or at least a changed state so that we can continue to advance. And then I want to talk about self-care. 30 years into this career field, sometimes I tell myself, oh, it's time to retire, it's time to quit. But here's the truth of it. We have to continue to develop new leaders. And as we develop those new leaders, those of us with 30 years of experience who've already been developed tried and true methods, we need to pass those methods down. And that's why this forum is important. Protocol matters, public affairs matters. The tactics, the techniques that we've developed, we have to tell someone, show someone, teach someone so that we can continue to change the world, because that's what we're doing. Next slide. So this is a slide, this is a living slide. I've been developing this slide since about 2008, and it always changes. So just so you kind of see, over here on the left, we talk about the external message. In public affairs, we're always concerned and looking outward facing, when in actuality, there are a couple audiences that we're interested in: external audiences and internal audiences. Now, if you look down under the external message, I have non-releasable message. That's all the secret stuff, all the stuff that we know behind the scenes that we can't let our audience outside know. However, that information is just as important, because one, you're talking on the external message, transparency, but all of the secret sensitive information, that's protecting the team. When you look over at these other bubbles, now I made a change to this slide. Down here, you see synergy of mission, which is the blue bubble in the triangle. I moved that up because when you develop your messages and talking points and themes, your visits, your itineraries, you do that using the information from the external message and the non-releasable information. And then that creates the synergy that feeds into these other bubbles. So things like taking care of people, those are huge, because that gets into recruitment and hiring, which helps us develop ways to meet our mission and meet our goals. We want to build champions, amplifying the message and making sure that our organization, our leaders, our team members that work side by side with us understand the messages, the talking points, the vision, the mission. Building champions is huge, because it's not enough for me just to say it. We need everybody saying it. And that creates unified message. And then down here at the bottom, stewardship. When you're working internationally, things like recycling and making good use of your resources, that sends a message. And sometimes people don't want to do business with you if they find that you don't have shared values. So those are things we have to think about. We can go to the next slide. So everything that I do, I think about this. Everything is a story. Everything is a story. So from the beginning of the planning for the visit to the end, what they experience in the beginning, in the middle, and the end matters. You think about your tone, your objectives, your opportunities, and then you also think about your desired effect and your outcome, because what you want to create is impact. And when you think about strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats, which is a normal, what we SWOT in the military, I add something extra, tactics, because the things that you plan for, the things that you look at as far as good, bad, and ugly, you can always think of a tactic to counter those things that may be contrary to your message. Message is about having a receiver understand what you're trying to convey. A tactic foot stomps it and makes it real for them. You can go to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about, meeting your audience at the point of capacity. You have to think about, how do they think? How do they like to receive their information? Those are things that you can ask in advance. Those are things that you can respond to with a tactic. You also want to understand what you are able to respond to, and you also have to be well yourself. And that gets back to, are you feeling positive about the experience? Have you planned? Have you researched? Are you well and unwell? Because all of that will send a message and convey either a positive or negative experience to your audience. Next slide. And most importantly, we want to treat people like people. We want to make sure, because basically, if you're meeting a human need, if you're making someone feel good about being in your establishment or attending your installation, again, you're providing those bathroom breaks with the right person at the right time, given the presentations, answering the questions. Those things make it overall a better experience. And those things can be the one thing that makes or breaks your engagement. Next slide. And so I'm back at this slide. So for a long time, I only had 4 of these basic communication tenets: communication, information, engagement, and outreach. Those were the 4 basic ways as a public affairs officer that I would work with my protocol officer to convey the message. Recently, I've gotten really good at using measurement, because here's the thing: if you have someone that comes out to visit, after that visit, if you provide them a feedback sheet, you can take that feedback, apply it towards the next visit. You can use it on the social media sites to talk about and to use as sort of a testimonial. But you will get the information that you need to revise your message, to revise your vision, and to help your commander or leadership feel better and understand better about what's happening or not happening in the organization. But again, the goal is to increase frequency of communication, to reduce miscommunication, and to sustain synergy of efforts. A lot of times we forget that we've got to create certain efficiencies for our leaders. Protocol and public affairs together creates that efficiency, because we are the people out front representing our organizations. And for me, being in the international environment, it was even more important, because you stick out when you're an American in Asia. You stick out when you're an American and you're in a place like Bavaria in Germany, like where we were stationed. As you're representing your organizations and as you're working with your leadership and your your protocol teams, having that information and understanding what you can and can't say is critical, because everything is a message. So over to the right, when you think about what meetings do you have, who you're hosting, inputs and outputs, how can I revise, change, shape that information into something that's tangible and usable and releasable? You always want to coordinate. You want to coordinate with your protocol officer and your operations staff so that you know at least 3 months in advance, so you can create and develop an editorial calendar, so you can plan in advance for your social media and have your image out in the front, but your products also need to be approved, so it gives you time. You want to create volume and frequency, but you also have to have credible information. Your information has to be right. And then impact and influence, and you want to be able to evaluate your performance. Next slide. So that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.